Okay, is everybody okay with that? This is just a very, very basic setup. It lets me get well, in this case, we're going to call it a sprite, but it can be an avatar or anything like that. It lets me get it back to the middle of the screen, and it does something, any old thing, whatever you want it to do. It does something to indicate that it's been clicked. I click it, it says hello. After 2 seconds, it stops doing that, and I'm back to normal. Okay, I can drag it over here, and you can just read through the code and you know exactly what it's going to do. It's not going to move anywhere. I haven't told it to move anywhere. And so everything's fine. Now 2 seconds, I get impatient. So I'm just going to switch that to 1, but you don't have to. And so when I am clicked, just say hello. Okay, that's happened. Great. Okay, so now the thing that we really want to get into is how do I keep track of this little task? The little task that I have is to know how many times this thing's been clicked. And the way to do that is variables. Okay, so I'm just going to stop for a second and just talk about data types and variables, just very quickly, and just ask what you think might be included in data types and variables. Okay, so I'm gonna make myself some space here. The data types and variables. Okay, so either in the chat or if you've got a microphone and you feel like shouting something out. When I'm talking, when you see this phrase here, I haven't defined anything for you. I've just kind of run this phrase by you, data types and variables. I'd like to know what comes to mind. What do you think a variable might be? Now, some of you have taken a lot of math classes. Some of you have taken algebra. Some of you not so much. And in computer science, of course, it goes a lot further. The variables and data types they're a lot more varied. Pardon my using that in the context of variables, but then they are kind of in an algebra class, right? In an algebra class, you've got your x, y, z. They represent some numbers, and that's basically what you're dealing with. But in a computer class, they can be lots of different things. So just out of curiosity, an unknown entity. Okay, that's a great suggestion. Great suggestion. So unknown entity. And certainly in the context of an algebra class, and that you can't read my writing, entity. That's exactly what it is. Okay, if we have solve 2x 2x plus 1 equals 5, that is my variable. Okay, awesome. And it is. Okay, so that's an example of a variable, and we can use it. So what other things? So we can maybe from that just I'll just jot something down. Numeric. Okay, can a variable be numeric? Well, yeah, certainly if you're stealing from algebra, that's kind of the most likely thing you're going to have is a numeric value as a variable. Great, and so this is a data type that can be cast as a variable. Perfect. Anything else that might be variable? Numeric, yes. Don't be shy. Coordinates. Okay, so we're coordinates can be absolutely. So coordinates. In fact, that's an interesting one. Let's think about that. Coordinates. Okay, so again, just for people maybe or maybe not familiar, we now, instead of having just a simple variable like x, we have a pair of variables like x and y, or multiple variables x, y, and z that can determine, say, where something is in space. And that's a great one. I mean, think about it. If you imagine the flight path of, I don't know, a SpaceX rocket, its trajectory is well known, or its anticipated trajectory is well known. And those will all, like, in order to specify where this thing is or where it's anticipated to be or where it's gone. Okay, awesome. I see another suggestion. We need to know this stuff. Okay, x, y, and z, and those are numeric variables. And of course, depending on your coordinate system, with a rocket going into space, that makes things a little bit difficult. But if if you're building something, your house or anything like that, or you're looking inside your room, length, width, and height are all coordinates, and where something is supposed to be placed or whatever is absolutely variable. Okay, so in order, you've got sort of a complex variable in that ordered pair or triplet. Great, awesome. So that's extended, that's multi-dimensional, but for sure. So coordinates they're still numeric values, but we need sets of them. Okay, awesome. Alphabetic. Okay, I love it. So the suggestion here is alphabetic. That's what I got from the chat. And absolutely, okay? And with this said, well, these basic things, A, B, C, D, and E, and dot, 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 um, are all elements that can be selected. Okay, we might say pick a character, any character. The old cliche. Infinitely many monkeys typing on infinitely many typewriters will eventually produce some Shakespearean play. And so, what is the next thing, the next key that they hit? Well, that's a variable. Okay, and we don't know what it is. And so, alphabetic is great. And so we had numeric and alphabetic. And so I'm going to leave that as an example. And then something like, well, what do I want to pick? Dog, horse, car, taco, okay? Anything like that. These are actually lists of words. But if the words themselves are unknown, so we can extend this, and it's not just one letter at a time, a variable can represent a word. Okay, great. And it can carry on, and I don't have time to write it all out, but it can represent entire phrases as well. Okay, great. So, look, action, shape, yes, okay, great. Okay, attributes, okay, perfect. Look, so there's a verb there, a noun there, another noun there. So, basically, in fact, I'll extend this and just call it attributes. Yes, attributes. Okay, can all be variable. Okay, so any of this is awesome. And if we kept on going for another half an hour, you would come up with a very long list of examples of things that could be variable. But really, a variable is variable, anything that represents an, try to type that neatly, unknown of any data type. Okay. And that will work once we do a little bit better talking about what data types can be. Okay, and I won't get through all of them now, but I'm just going to talk about a few basic data types. In fact, we've already hit on a few of them. Okay, characters, symbols, numbers, and even numbers themselves. There are different data types to represent different numbers. But is this okay if we just take basically variable just to be some abstract concept that means, okay, it's just a placeholder, and in that placeholder, it's going to take or accept or recognize any one of some kind of list of elements or values. Okay, pretty broad strokes definition, very informal definition, but is that okay? Cool. All right, so good. And so when I think about data types, well, let's just do this. When I think about data types quickly, types, really broad strokes, I would like to think about one, numeric, and two, well, some kind of characters. Okay, we can call it alphabetic characters. Okay, so for numeric data types, we can have things like 1, 2, 3, 712. Okay, that's writing terrible. 1, 712. These are all what we would call integers. Okay, and integers just being counting numbers. Okay, that's it. Things that, that make sense. You can have this many of something. And if you want to, we can extend that and have plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus dot, dot, dot. Okay, that is a data type. Okay, and that's important to distinguish from. So let's just do this, and we'll do this. We'll do the number 1.372. Okay, this is different. Okay, I've got a decimal here. This is a number between 1 and 2 that isn't 1 or 2. And this is a decimal, as you recognize, but this is called a floating point value. And so, I mean, the number pi that some of you will recognize. Well, we can't really do pi properly with computers, but 3.14159. And if we were to do something like 1.3333, any of these things here are what we would call floats. Now the decimals in math, okay, but to us they'll be called floats. And they can be other things too, but for now we'll just keep track of this. Okay. And I'm only bringing this up now because when we get into coding where we're actually typing, something weird will happen where if you were to do something like 22 divided by 7 in your code, well, if you do it in your calculator, it's going to be 3.142857. Okay, if you type that in your calculator, that's what you're going to get. But when you write your program, you're just going to get 3. Okay, and that's going to seem wrong, but in fact, your computer is doing everything right. Okay, there's a difference between an integer and a floating point, and so these data types matter. Okay, another one that might seem counterintuitive is if you were to do, say, 57 divided by, well, 100, nice and easy, you would say, no problem, that's 0.57. Okay, but your code will say it's 0. Okay, so this is just something that we need to be aware of. Okay, data types, different types of numbers behave differently. Okay, great. And then when I get into numeric things, well, I can have something like a char. So yes, yep, yeah. Depending on which language you're using, of course, and how it's being implemented. Now, if you specify that it's a float, then 3.9 is 3.9. But if your program thinks it's an integer, it's 3. Yeah, it can't handle that. It always rounds down. It doesn't do what I would call human rounding. Whereas if it's 0.5 or above, it's supposed to round up. That's not what happens. It just truncates all decimals. Okay, and we'll get into that when we need to. But it's not uncommon for somebody to have a super annoying bug in the code, and the reality is the program is evaluating an integer when you're expecting a floating point or a decimal, and it's just throwing all that information away. And you're saying, well, why did my rocket not land on the moon? Why did it go past? Well, hopefully by then you've got it all figured out. Yeah, cool. Okay, so characters we need to think about. Okay, and then I think we can stop there. Depending on where we are, a character can be a short string. In fact, probably a lot of you are familiar with this. Text messages, at least they did, have a very very hard limit at whatever it was. 256 characters or something like that? You just couldn't go beyond it. And that's because there weren't enough bits assigned to take any more than that. Okay, so a short string of letters, which is good enough for most words and most email addresses, works. Okay. So I think that's probably all we need for now. But what I want to just talk about very quickly, we'll carry on. We'll build more of these as we have to. But another thing that's actually different, it takes a whole bunch of these and puts them together, is the concept of lists. Okay, so a list can actually be a sort of a single storage area and something that I can work with as a variable, but it contains a whole bunch more variables. Okay, so just to have that in the back of your mind. Okay, great. So a paragraph or a story, and it can carry on. We can carry on. I mean, we can have, we can have, of course, files like an image file or something like that. Has to be stored in a certain way. Okay. Now, ultimately, it all comes down to binary storage, but that's okay. Great. Okay, so data types, characters, and so what I want to do if I want to count something, of course, and not to insult you in any way, but if I want to count something, I'm going to use one of these numeric choices, okay? If I'm going to count something, well, I don't really care if it's a decimal or not. Or if I'm going to count how many times my little icon here is, or sprite is clicked, 1, 2, and 3, those numbers are fine, okay? So we're going to live with those for now, and then lists, which I don't think I'll have time to get to at all. Perfect. Cool. Any questions? Okay. So I think what I'll do just to make sure that we have something to play with for the start of tomorrow's class is get going on this. So what do I want this thing to do? Now looking at this in terms of data types, well, when I click this thing, it says hello. Of course, the word hello is just something, well, we can call it alphanumeric, but it's what's called a string. Okay, a string. A string is a whole bunch of characters put together. And you can count numeric values like 1, 2, like all of our integers 0 to 9 as characters, and they don't behave as numbers in that case, they behave as text. So this thing is saying say hello. Now for 1 second, well, great, that's a numeric value. This thing's going to say after 1 second, go. So with numeric values, we have concept of greater than and less than. With strings, we have the concept of alphabetical order, but it's not really true that one thing's greater than or less than another thing. Okay, just to have that in the back of your mind. So when I restart my program and send this thing to the beginning, I click on this thing and it says hello. Well, great. My task is I want to count how many times I've clicked it, and now I just click it over and over again and nothing good is happening. It's not counting. So I need a variable. Shocking. And if I go to my variables little my group of code blocks here, I can look around in there all I want, and I'm not really going to find a variable that I want. Okay, so let's create one. Okay, so just intuitively want to create a variable that counts how many times my sprite has been clicked. So I'm just going to go for this right here. Can everybody see this? Make a variable. Got make a variable. So if I do that, I'm going to get an option here for this sprite or for all sprites or this sprite only. Right now it doesn't matter. I'm going to just let it be all sprites, and I want to call it something that represents what I want it to do. Okay, it's really important to make your variables, to name them sensibly. I could just call it X. I mean, I could just call it X and be done with it and say, okay, this variable is called X, and X represents how many times my sprite has been clicked. But I could do better than that. I mean, I'm free to choose the name of this variable. I might as well make it something that I can remember when I'm 6,000 lines deep in code, and I can say, what was I talking about again? So does anybody have a suggestion? What would you like to call this variable? Anything will do, and if nobody wants to pipe up, I'll just come up with something. Say it again. Bounce. Oh, okay. Well, we can do it. It's not going to jump around right now, but okay, we can. Steve. Okay. Well, we'll do it because that's what you asked for. But just for everybody else, remember what this doesn't support. What I just said we should do is name it something that that indicates what it does. So Steve, we can certainly call it Steve. Okay. But I'll do it because that's what you asked for and you were the one who spoke. But I might pick something like, oh, I see another choice here, counter. Counter, okay. You know what? If nobody's offended, let's do counter. Let's do counter. Just because we don't have a lot of time to play around, and this does the job that I think it should do. This is actually describing what I want it to describe. Okay, it's going to describe how many times I've clicked this thing. Okay, Steve will work. X will work. Anything that you want. It's your code. You can do whatever you want. I promise you. But for this and for the demonstration, I think I'll stick with counter. So I've now created this variable. Okay, and this is going to be as simple as it is. So now I click on this thing, and counter doesn't do anything at all. Right? I'm clicking on this thing. I can start my code over again. And so, well, what might I do? Well, it's as easy as this. In this case, I want to, intuitively, I want to change the value of counter. I want to increase it by the number 1 every time I click that. I don't know, is that an apple or a cherry? I guess it's more like an apple by its stem. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, it looks kind of like a cherry to me sometimes. I just played too much Pac-Man. Yeah, you want to think about that? Are you sure? No, okay. Okay, apple. It's an apple. I want to increment this counter variable by the number 1. And so all I'm going to do is say when this thing is clicked. Now, up to you. Do I want to change by 1 first or say hello first? It really doesn't make a difference. And this isn't going to work very well here. Change error. Okay, so I click on this thing and it's like, no, a variable or name does not exist, but this is nice. I've invented this variable now called counter. And so all I want to do is click on that. And so now I say when I am clicked, change counter by 1. And when I do this thing, all of a sudden you've now got a way to keep score, you know, in your game. Every time I click this thing, it's going to increase by 1, the value of counter. And of course, it's going to do this repetitive behavior, say hello, which we don't really need to do. We just put that in there to play with. So maybe let's get rid of that. And now you can see counter just goes up every time I click the apple. Okay. Everybody okay with that? And that's it. That's all we need to do. We've created a variable. It's a numeric variable. And we're going to increase it by 1 every time this happens. Just a little bit more on the cleanup side. If I stop my program and start it again now and go back and start clicking this thing, it's going to pick up where I left off. And that might not be the behavior that I want, or it might be. Okay, just totally depends on the code that you're working on. If you want this to be a data logger, you know, that just goes, shuts down for the night, starts up in the morning and goes. Yeah, you probably do want it to pick up where it left off. Me, I don't want that. I want it to reset. So as part of my cleanup code, I'm just going to set counter equal to 0. And when I restart my code, there I go. And so I play around with this by dragging it around the screen. But if I click on this thing, 2, 3, and that's all there is to it. Okay, I've invented a variable, and now this thing is actually keeping track of something that I do. And this is being stored in, well, in memory for the duration of this game. Okay, and I stop this thing and I start it again. Okay, it doesn't seem like much, but it's a very important element of writing a program to be able to keep track of stuff like that. Okay. I think we're there, aren't we? Yeah. I'd like to... No, no time. I said this is over at 3. Okay, I'm going to stop there and ask, I mean, we hardly got to do anything at all. Okay, so it would wait the 2 seconds before counting. Okay, great. And that's right. So I can get either of those behaviors here. So I can say hello for 1 second and then the counter will go up. Okay, and that might be what I want. Like that. Or, and again, you know, really depends on what you want your program to do. Now it's going to go up. Well, in this case, while there's a bit of a delay, a bit of a lag there. It's not the best thing, but that's working there. If you put it below hello, you have to wait for the 2 seconds to finish first. Exactly right. Okay. So an interesting, let me just, field these questions. And for next class, I'll start on lists. Okay. I'm going to be able to, what I want to do next is instead of say hello every single time, I'll want it to pick something random to say, okay? And then I want another sprite, and then I want them to talk to each other, okay? So that's where we're going to go. We're going to build this up. But starting with the basics of variables here. So I think I'll stop.